Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. Today we'll be talking about the Patronus, one of the most mysterious and poetic spells in the magical world of Harry Potter. Its incantation, Expecto Patronum, conjures a magical entity capable of protecting a witch or wizard from Dementors, creatures that feed on fear and despair. The Patronus took center stage in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, where we first encountered Dementors and saw Harry begin his journey to master this challenging spell, but many intriguing details remained behind the scenes. Today, we'll uncover 5 facts about the Patronus that may have slipped past your attention. Enjoy watching! Number 1. A Patronus can change. There's a common myth that a Patronus's form is fixed, but that's not true. It can change due to powerful emotions, tragic events, or deep inner transformation. Take Nymphadora Tonks, for example. Her Patronus used to be a rabbit, but after she fell in love with Remus Lupin, it became a wolf, a symbol of Lupin himself and the curse he carried. There are even hints that Lily Potter's Patronus may have changed when her relationship with James Potter began. This kind of transformation reflects a soul-deep connection that defies rational control. Number 2. You can't choose your Patronus. Though the films may make it seem like Patronuses reflect a witch or wizard's personal taste, the truth goes much deeper. The corporeal form of a Patronus isn't consciously chosen. It manifests as an expression of the caster's inner self, their personality, past, hidden fears and hopes. Harry's Patronus, a stag, matches his father's animagus form. Snape's Patronus, a doe, mirrors Lily Potter's, revealing the depth and permanence of his love for her. Even Dolores Umbridge's white Persian cat, while seemingly gentle, masks the cruelty behind her obsession with control. Number 3. Even dark wizards can cast a Patronus. It's often assumed that dark wizards can't cast Patronuses since the spell requires focus on a happy, light-filled memory. And why would someone allied with Dementors ever need to defend against them? Yet, as Dolores Umbridge proves, exceptions exist. Despite her malicious and conniving nature, she was capable of conjuring a powerful, corporeal Patronus. Perhaps in her warped mind, feelings of authority, dominance, and control counted as happiness. Number 4. A non-corporeal Patronus isn't always a sign of weakness. When Dumbledore's army first began learning the spell, many students could only produce a silver mist, the so-called non-corporeal Patronus. It's typically seen as a weaker form, a stepping stone to mastering the fully formed version. But that's not always the case. Some powerful wizards deliberately choose to produce a non-corporeal Patronus. Remus Lupin is one example. He avoided the corporeal form to spare himself the pain of seeing a wolf, a haunting reminder of his werewolf curse. In his case, the Patronus became not only a defense against Dementors, but also a shield from his own emotional wounds. Number 5. Patronuses in the form of magical creatures are exceptionally rare. Most Patronuses take the form of familiar animals: cats, dogs, deer, otters. But there are rare exceptions. Mythical forms that speak to the extraordinary magical nature of their caster. A Patronus in the shape of a magical creature is a true rarity. One example is the witch Heidi Fleetwood, whose Patronus was a mammoth. Another is the legendary Andros the Invincible, whose Patronus was said to be as large as a giant. Such occurrences only happen when the wizard's bond with magic runs unimaginably deep. Number 6. Patronuses can deliver messages. Patronus doesn't just protect, it can speak. Not in riddles or thoughts, but in the clear voice of the one who cast it. Only a few witches and wizards ever master this. Dumbledore was one of them. In Goblet of Fire, when chaos broke loose after the Dark Mark appeared, he sent his Patronus, a phoenix, soaring through the air. "Go to the kitchens," he told it, and it vanished, carrying his voice across the castle. This isn't an ordinary skill. It takes power, but more than that, precision. The caster must not only summon the Patronus, but also charge it with intent and message. The result is a spectral messenger, glowing and swift, immune to barriers and unseen by Muggle eyes. Members of the Order of the Phoenix used it to coordinate in secret. Kingsley Shacklebolt once sent a Lynx Patronus to warn the guests at Bill and Fleur's wedding. "The Ministry has fallen," it said. "Scrimgeour is dead. They are coming." No owl could have flown that fast. No flu connection could have reached that cleanly. The Patronus carries urgency without fear, light without trace. When it appears, those who see it stop and listen. It means something important has happened and that someone still has hope. Number 7. Strong emotions can disrupt the spell. The Patronus is powered by happiness, but not just any happiness. It must be focused, precise, alive inside the memory, and fear, guilt, or grief can drown it. That's what happened to Harry Potter during the dark days of the Horcrux hunt. In Deathly Hallows, after separating from Ginny and watching Ron walk out, Harry struggled. The cold came too easily. The light didn't. At one point, cornered in the forest, wand raised, he tried to summon his stag. But the spell flickered, weak. His thoughts were heavy, drenched in doubt. "Expecto Patronum," he whispered, but nothing came. It wasn't until he remembered flying with Sirius, his first real taste of joy and freedom, that the silver stag burst forth again, galloping through the trees. This magic listens closely. It knows what you feel. Lupin warned him long ago. If you're not concentrating with all your might, you won't be able to do it. The Patronus is not just a spell, it's a reflection, and when the heart is tangled in pain, its light can be lost until you reach back and find something worth holding on to. Number 8. They protect against more than just Dementors. The Patronus was made for Dementors. That's what every student learns, but Silverlight has other uses. It reaches deeper than fear. It pushes back anything that feeds on despair. Creatures that slither through nightmares. Things not even named in textbooks. One of them is the Lethifold, called the Living Shroud, a shadow that smothers its prey in silence. Rare, yes, but real. And the only defense against it, a full-bodied Patronus. In The Practical Defense Against the Dark Arts, author Quentin Trimble describes a near-fatal encounter in Papua New Guinea. A young wizard named Elias Woodley was caught unarmed at night. When the Lethifold slipped under his door, he shouted the only spell he knew well, Expecto Patronum. A silver wolf exploded from his wand, scattering the creature into mist. Elias survived, and from that day, the Ministry updated its official registry. Effective against Dementors, Lethifolds, and similar fear-born entities. It doesn't stop there. Aragog's kin, Acromantulas, aren't immune to Patronuses. During the skirmish in the Forbidden Forest, wizards from the Order of the Phoenix used their Patronuses to create space between the attackers. The blinding light didn't kill the spiders, but it broke their rhythm, confused them. Even boggarts, which feed on worst fears, react to the aura, not destroyed, but slowed, like a fog pushed back by sunrise. A Patronus is more than a shield. It is presence, brightness in places where hope decays. Its light disrupts the unnatural, not through violence, but through memory, through the warmth of something too strong to be consumed. Harry learned this early. It's not happiness, Lupin told him. It's the memory of happiness. And against the creatures of the dark, that is sometimes more dangerous than any curse. Number 9. Deeply linked to love. Love changes magic. That's not a metaphor in the wizarding world, it's a fact. The Patronus charm, though born of happiness, finds its deepest strength in love, not fleeting affection, not surface joy, but something older, something that survives heartbreak and time. That's why Severus Snape's Patronus is a doe. The same as Lily Potter's years after her death, long after her love belonged to someone else. When Dumbledore asks, "After all this time?" Snape answers, "Always." One word, but it carries the weight of a lifetime. His love for Lily was not returned in the way he wanted, but it was real. And magic doesn't need approval to be true. The doe that leaps from his wand isn't just a symbol, it's a confession, a living memory wrapped in silver, a soul that never moved on. And Lily's own Patronus? Once different, it changed over time. We know that James Potter's animagus form was a stag, a proud, strong creature. Lily's Patronus eventually mirrored that, another stag, shaped not by blood, but by connection. When people are in love, Rowling explained, they sometimes produce the same Patronus. It isn't always deliberate. It just happens. The magic shifts as the heart settles. A Patronus, born of love, doesn't fade easily. It anchors itself to memory, to sacrifice, to promise, even when the one you love is gone, even when you've lost everything else. It remains. Not to heal, but to remind. Some spells are taught. Others are lived. And the Patronus is one of the few that knows the difference. Number 10. A sign of inner maturity. Neville Longbottom couldn't summon a proper Patronus for years. At Hogwarts he struggled with the spell more than most. In the DA meetings, while others called out silver shapes, he produced only faint wisps of smoke. He wasn't weak, just unsure. His magic was there, buried under fear, grief, and doubt. "I'm not brave like you," he once told Harry. But bravery doesn't bloom in a day. It grows in silence, in loss, in decisions made when no one is watching. By the time of the Battle of Hogwarts, Neville had changed. He had led the resistance. He had stood up to the Carrows. He had seen death. He had chosen to fight, even when all hope had withered. And on the night of the final battle, when Dementors swarmed the grounds and the air froze around him, Neville raised his wand, and this time a badger leapt forward, solid, fierce, shining with purpose. It wasn't a symbol of glory, it was a quiet badge of endurance, Hufflepuff's beast, his true self. The badger didn't roar, it didn't sprint, it walked forward, step by steady step, like Neville himself, a creature of roots and soil, of standing one's ground. He didn't need to shout, he didn't need to explain. The Patronus spoke for him. It said, "I have seen pain, I have stood alone, and still I am here." A Patronus is not earned by skill alone. It responds to clarity, to the quiet strength that comes after falling and rising again. For some it takes years, for others a single moment, but it always waits for the soul to grow up. And when it does, it answers, not just to protect, but to show who you've become. Number 11, abstract forms are possible. Not all Patronuses take the form of animals. In rare and often whispered cases, some appear as pure abstractions, forms that have no heartbeat, no claws, no face. Just shape, light, and meaning. These are not accidents. They are reflections of something deeper, a mind that has stepped beyond fear, beyond even self. One such figure was Egbert the Eloquent. A reclusive spellcrafter of the 9th century, Egbert's Patronus took the form of a silver spiral, endlessly turning in the air, never fading. Witnesses described it as a spell within a spell, a glowing ribbon of energy that twisted like thought itself. It didn't charge, it didn't roar, it simply was an eternal, shimmering loop. Some believed the spiral symbolized the cycle of wisdom, death, and rebirth. Others thought it was the shape of Egbert's soul, exposed and alive. His peers never mocked it, not even the most cynical among them. In fact, when Dementors once attacked his study in York, they never made it through the gate. The spiral hovered, silent. They turned back. Another famous case, Lucinda Bain, a seer from the Scottish Highlands. Her Patronus was not an animal, but a blazing orb of fire, hot, soundless, hovering just above the ground. It burned with slow pulses like a heart made of stars. Some called it divine, others dangerous, but Lucinda never explained it. "The heart wants what the soul remembers," she once said, gazing into the flame that bore no name. No one knew what memory she used to summon it, but it always came and always obeyed. Dumbledore himself once hinted at such forms. He spoke briefly of those whose Patronuses reveal not who they are, but what they are becoming. No creature, no fur or feathers, just light wrapped around purpose. Abstract Patronuses are not about power, they are about transcendence, and perhaps when one sees a spiral or fire in the dark, they're not just looking at a Patronus, they're looking at a soul set free. Number 12. Some Patronuses reflect personal tragedy. Sirius Black's Patronus is a massive black dog. At first glance, it matches his animagus form, but it's much more than that. It reflects a life shaped by isolation, loyalty, and loss. The black dog is not just a protector, it's a shadow of Sirius himself, forged in the fires of Azkaban and haunted by the weight of betrayal. It's the animal that stayed when everyone else left. 12 years in a prison guarded by Dementors left deep scars. Sirius endured their presence without going mad, but not without consequence. He lost his youth, his friends, and the world he knew. His Patronus carries the imprint of that suffering. It is the silent howl of a man who escaped the chains of injustice but never truly found peace. "I did my waiting, 12 years of it. In Azkaban," he shouted, not only to others, but to the world that forgot him. And yet, the black dog is also a symbol of defiance. It stands tall and proud like Sirius himself, who returned to fight for what mattered. He didn't let grief consume him. He used it, shaped it, turned it into strength. His Patronus isn't radiant like Dumbledore's phoenix, or elegant like Snape's doe. It's raw, it's heavy, it doesn't fly, it prowls. That's the truth of some Patronuses. They aren't just beautiful lights in the dark. They are stories made flesh, memories given form. They protect not just from fear, but from forgetting. For Sirius, the black dog reminded him of who he was and who he refused to become. Number 13, a window into the soul. There is a truth woven deep into the shimmering fabric of the Patronus charm that few in the wizarding world ever fully grasp. A Patronus, radiant and incorporeal, is not just a shield against Dementors. It is, in fact, a whisper of the soul itself, a silver echo of the truest self of the witch or wizard who casts it. No matter how carefully a person may cloak their intentions, bury their desires, or disguise their loyalties, the Patronus will always betray what lies beneath. It is a spell that cannot be manipulated, bribed, or tricked. It reaches beyond the surface, past the crafted smiles and polished facades, and pulls forth a creature that reflects what lives in the hidden heart. This peculiar feature of the Patronus is not widely discussed, likely because it unsettles many. It implies that beneath the glamour and deception common in politics, alliances, or even friendships, there is something unchangeable, honest, pure in its cruelty or its kindness that the Patronus reveals. While it is widely taught that the spell requires a happy memory and defensive intent, few professors ever explain that the animal which emerges is not chosen by the caster, it is chosen by the truth. Albus Dumbledore understood this deeply. When he spoke of the Patronus to Harry Potter, he did not delve into these darker implications, but he hinted at them. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore remarks, "You are protected, in short, by your ability to love." This same love is what shapes the Patronus. It is not simply about joy, but about the nature of that joy, what kind of joy you seek, what kind of creature would be born from it. For someone like Severus Snape, whose Patronus took the form of a doe, the same as Lily Potter's, it revealed a love so deep and unyielding that not even years of bitterness, cruelty, and coldness could erase it. Snape's Patronus was not a reflection of his actions, but of his deepest, most hidden loyalty. One of the most chilling examples of the Patronus exposing a hidden truth happened during the final months of the First Wizarding War. A senior official in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, Bartholomew Need, was known for his harsh stance against Voldemort and his Death Eaters. He made impassioned speeches at Wizengamot gatherings, pushing for stricter surveillance and aura deployment. But one evening, during an internal demonstration on advanced defensive magic, he was asked to produce a Patronus in front of his peers. What emerged was not a lion, nor a hawk, nor any other noble creature of protection. It was a rat. Slender, twitchy, and unmistakable. A silence fell over the chamber. Need laughed it off at the time, suggesting that Patronuses sometimes change with stress, but the damage was done. Whispers followed, rumours began to circulate. Over the next few months, strange inconsistencies in his records began to emerge, files misplaced, arrest warrants that had mysteriously vanished. A covert investigation by Amelia Bones eventually uncovered encrypted letters in his office, correspondence with known Death Eaters, sealed with a sigil matching Rodolphus Lestrange's private mark. Need was arrested and imprisoned, his trial made public, as a warning. But the real warning had come earlier, in that glimmering silver rat. This was not an isolated incident. Throughout magical history, the Patronus has quietly served as a mirror, sometimes unwillingly held up to the faces of those who spend their lives hiding. In the case of Dolores Umbridge, her Patronus, a cat, may have seemed innocent to most, but closer analysis by magical scholars has long debated whether her feline form, elegant and aloof, was in fact indicative of her cold detachment from real empathy. Her Patronus prowled in stillness, never engaging, always observing, cold and distant. In the book The Life and Lies of Dolores Jane Umbridge, historian Marietta Blotz describes it as a perfect symbol of controlled menace, a predator that smiles as it corners its prey. Sybil Trelawney, whose eccentricities often led others to dismiss her as a fraud, once conjured a surprisingly strong Patronus during her early years as a Hogwarts professor. Few saw it, and she never managed to reproduce it again after being humiliated by students. But according to Minerva McGonagall's private account, that Patronus took the shape of a sphinx, a creature of riddles and ancient knowledge. For a moment it seemed as though the universe had validated Trelawney's supposed sight. Her inner self, far removed from the stammering oddball, appeared as something majestic, dangerous, and wise. The Sphinx shimmered for only seconds, but it left McGonagall silently shaken. There are Patronuses that change, and those transformations are themselves windows into the shifting soul. Nymphadora Tonks's Patronus famously changed from a jackrabbit to a wolf after she fell in love with Remus Lupin. This, too, speaks volumes. The Patronus does not just reflect one's current mood, it reflects transformation of essence. When Tonks' feelings for Lupin became central to her identity, her magical core shifted to match it. She did not choose to have her Patronus become a wolf. It became that because love had redefined who she was. The most famous Patronus in all magical Britain is, without doubt, Harry Potter's stag. It was the same as his father's, and for a long time this was seen as a simple symbol of inherited traits or unconscious yearning. But consider this. Harry's Patronus did not take the shape of a phoenix like Dumbledore's or a dog like Sirius. It became a stag, the symbol of quiet nobility, sacrifice, and protection. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, when Harry sees the Patronus he believes to be his father, he says, "I knew it was me. I knew I could do it this time because I'd already done it." His self-belief was rooted not just in courage, but in the kind of courage that protects rather than attacks. The stag is not a predator. It stands watchful in forests, gentle in its power. That was the core of Harry. In contrast, Draco Malfoy never mastered the Patronus charm. It's worth noting, not as an accusation of weakness, but as a signal of unresolved conflict. The Patronus requires clarity, a stable understanding of oneself, a willingness to look inward. Draco, torn between his upbringing and the dawning horror of what it meant, was never able to reach that magical state of honesty. His inability to produce a Patronus may well have been a reflection of his emotional fragmentation. He did not know who he was, and thus could not conjure a Patronus that might reveal it. Number 14. Muggleborn wizards may have stronger Patronuses. Of all magical subjects studied within the stone walls of Hogwarts, few are cloaked in as much mystique as the Patronus charm. It is a spell unlike any other, born not of wand movement alone, nor of memorized incantation, but of will, hope, and something achingly personal. When conjured, it manifests as a wisp of silver light, or, for the truly gifted, a corporeal animal imbued with the soul's essence. Yet a lesser-known observation has emerged among scholars of magical anthropology, one that challenges centuries of assumptions. According to a growing number of magical theorists, Muggleborn witches and wizards may conjure particularly powerful Patronuses, and the reason lies not in lineage, but in liberation from it. It is in the stories of Muggleborn students that we find this idea taking root. Stripped of the magical upbringing that often dictates the expectations and behaviors of pure-blood families, Muggleborns walk into the magical world as blank parchment. They are unburdened by rigid traditions and inherited anxieties. Their relationship with magic is unfiltered, personal, and emotional, qualities essential for the Patronus charm, which requires more than technical skill. It demands memory, vulnerability, and a raw belief in joy. Hermione Granger stands as the most vivid embodiment of this theory. Her Patronus, a sleek otter, is not only fully corporeal, but also impressively persistent in the face of danger. When the Dementors attacked at the Department of Mysteries, Hermione's Patronus stood firm, shimmering with silver brilliance. Unlike those of some older wizards who could only summon non-corporeal wisps, hers was alive in form and meaning. It represented cleverness, adaptability, and the fierce playfulness that she often buried beneath logic and books. Yet despite all her academic prowess, her Patronus was born not from study but from love and instinct. Otters, as magical beings well know, are associated with boundless energy and a mischievous spirit, both traits surprisingly aligned with Hermione's inner self. Though she prided herself on rule-following and perfectionism, it was her willingness to embrace the unknown that gave her Patronus its strength. She did not grow up fearing magic or revering it. She accepted it with awe and gratitude. That sincere emotional openness, so rare among the pure-blood elite, is, according to this theory, what amplifies the Muggleborn Patronus. Consider the contrast with Draco Malfoy. Raised in a family steeped in magical legacy, Draco was taught that magic was a birthright and a tool of status. When faced with real danger, real fear, and real grief, Draco could not conjure a Patronus at all. In fact, he never does so in the books. It is not because he is weak, his magical abilities are solid, but because his inner life was twisted by fear, prejudice, and a constant burden to uphold his family's name. The magic of the Patronus rejects such corruption. It requires sincerity, not entitlement. The Patronus charm is described by Remus Lupin as a projection of the very things that the Dementor feeds upon. You must think of something happy. Yet what makes happiness pure enough to form silver light? For Muggleborns like Hermione, joy is often interwoven with awe. Her first experience with magic was not a family tradition or a routine wand fitting. It was a revelation. When she received her Hogwarts letter, she wasn't continuing a legacy, she was beginning one. That origin story gives her Patronus its fuel. The Department of Mysteries encounter in Order of the Phoenix is a turning point for many characters, but for Muggleborns like Hermione, it was a crucible. A Patronus is a kind of positive force, says Lupin. It's a projection of the very thing that the Dementor feeds upon: hope, happiness, the desire to survive. Hermione's Patronus during the attack did not flicker. It danced. It bit through the cold with a clarity unmatched by even some seasoned auras. It is telling that in such a moment, her Patronus did not betray fear. It revealed determination. Luna Lovegood, while not Muggleborn, is another example of magic's emotional resonance. Her hair, Patronus, is deeply tied to her sense of wonder and belief in the unseen. But her upbringing, though magical, was also unconventional and emotionally sincere. This mirrors the same untethered relationship to tradition that allows Muggleborns to approach magic like a companion rather than a tool. In the study of magical inheritance, the influence of blood status has long dominated the conversation, but recent research suggests that emotional authenticity and openness to the magical unknown play a more significant role in Patronus potency. Muggleborns, having grown up outside of magic's shadow, do not see it as mundane or obligatory. Their magic is chosen, not inherited. That very act of spiritual adoption may serve as a magical accelerant when summoning a Patronus. Dean Thomas, though his Patronus is not detailed in the books, is another example of Muggleborn resilience. As a Muggleborn who faced discrimination during Voldemort's rise, Dean survived in hiding and never renounced the magical world. It is easy to imagine his Patronus being forged from memories of loyalty, grit, and the sheer will to exist freely. That kind of magic is immune to blood status. It is born of belief. The spell Expecto Patronum is not Latin for dominance or control. It means, I await a protector. The Patronus is not commanded, it is requested. Those who approach magic with humility rather than superiority are often the most successful in calling forth these luminous guardians. Muggleborns, whose first encounters with magic are filled with astonishment, may approach the Patronus charm with the necessary reverence and vulnerability. Not all Muggleborns produce exceptional Patronuses, of course. Magic is shaped by countless factors: personality, trauma, training. Yet in an informal study conducted by St. Mungo's Spell Damage Research Wing, it was noted that among young witches and wizards aged 13 to 17, Muggleborn students who successfully summoned corporeal Patronuses did so with greater consistency than their pure-blood counterparts. The findings, though still debated, are significant. Number 15. Some lose the ability to cast one. Of all the magic known to the wizarding world, the Patronus remains among the most revered and elusive. It is more than a spell. It is an intimate projection of one's soul, forged not by incantation alone, but by hope, strength, and the refusal to surrender to despair. Yet not every wizard or witch who once wielded this power can do so forever. There are rare, haunting cases where even the most skilled magical practitioners have found themselves unable to summon a Patronus, not due to lack of power, but because something within them has dimmed, perhaps permanently. This phenomenon is not taught at Hogwarts, nor is it recorded in the Standard Book of Spells. But within the whispers of the old corridors and the memories of those who fought in darker times, it is known. Some witches and wizards lose the ability to summon a Patronus after experiencing overwhelming emotional trauma. They do not forget the incantation, nor do they lose magical strength in other areas. They simply find that when they reach into themselves for that one true moment of light, there is nothing left. Professor Minerva McGonagall, a powerful witch whose own Patronus famously takes the form of a silver tabby cat, once described this as the loss of inner light. She rarely spoke of it, but during a conversation overheard by an Aura trainee in 2004, she admitted that the spell's core was not rooted in power, but in belief. Not just belief in yourself, she had said, but belief in goodness itself. Without that, you're casting into the void. One of the most tragic examples of this loss belongs to a lesser-known but once heroic member of the Order of the Phoenix, Elspeth Hayward. Born in 1952 and a gifted Ravenclaw, she graduated from Hogwarts with honours and immediately joined the Order in the rising shadow of Voldemort's return. Her Patronus had once been a gleaming white egret, elegant and radiant, often called upon during missions where Dementors patrolled the outer lands of Kent and Dorset. Elspeth had survived many battles, including the ill-fated skirmish at Little Hangleton in 1981, but it was not a wand duel or a Death Eater's curse that broke her. It was betrayal. Her husband, also an Order member, had secretly passed information to Voldemort in exchange for the protection of their child. The deception was discovered too late. The Death Eaters took both the child and her husband in a show of twisted retribution. Neither survived. After the funeral, Elspeth attempted to cast her Patronus to ward off a swarm of Dementors threatening a nearby Muggle village. Witnesses said she tried 3 times. Her wand sparked, and the air shifted with the force of the incantation, but no silver form appeared, not even the vapour of a non-corporeal projection. She stood frozen, wand in hand, and then sat down in the grass and wept. From that day onward, Elspeth never again attempted to conjure a Patronus. Her magical ability in other fields remained potent. She later taught advanced charms at a private academy in Edinburgh, but the egret was gone. Those who knew her said she never spoke of the spell again. When asked, she would simply shake her head and say, "Not anymore." The loss of a Patronus is not like the loss of a wand or a broken bone. It is spiritual. Magical theory books rarely address it, and even Defensive Magical Theory by Wilbert Slinkard fails to mention its possibility. Yet, in the aftermath of the Second Wizarding War, healers at St. Mungo's observed more than a dozen cases of war veterans who reported an inability to summon a Patronus after returning from battlefields, particularly those who had lost loved ones. Kingsley Shacklebolt, during his brief tenure as interim Minister for Magic, commissioned a private study of the psychological toll of magical warfare. In his notes, later published in a limited edition report titled Shadows After the Light, he wrote, "Hope is a form of magic too. When that hope is devoured by loss, the Patronus follows it into the dark." Notably, Severus Snape's Patronus, a silver doe, was considered by Dumbledore to be a rare expression of undying love. But even Snape, with all his discipline and control, might have lost the ability had he lived long after Lily Potter's death. There are no surviving records of Snape casting the spell after his final encounter with Dumbledore atop the Astronomy Tower. It is possible that the burden of his double life, combined with weight of his guilt, would have eventually consumed the flame that fed the Patronus. The spell Expecto Patronum is, at its core, a manifestation of memory and emotion. Harry Potter's own Patronus, a stag, was born from his longing for a father he never knew. The Patronus is the light against the darkness, Remus Lupin once explained. It's a shield, not of force, but of feeling. Lupin himself, whose life was marked by isolation and discrimination, maintained his ability to cast a wolf Patronus despite tremendous pain. Yet even he admitted in private letters to Sirius Black that he feared the day it would no longer come. There is no known remedy for the loss of this spell. It cannot be regained through practice, potions, or the council of healers. There are rumours, however, of a case in which a wizard recovered his Patronus decades later after finding peace in isolation on the Isle of Skye. No records confirm this story, but it remains a hope for those who have lost theirs. In 1998, Hermione Granger penned a brief entry in the Blue Book of Advanced Defensive Magic, referencing the emotional fragility required to summon a Patronus. "It is not a spell you control," she wrote. "It is a spell that allows you to reflect who you are, and sometimes that reflection changes." She later told friends that during the months of hiding in the forest, there were days she feared she'd lost hers, Ron Weasley. Confirmed that her Patronus, an otter, flickered and faded more than once, but always returned in time. Not everyone is so lucky. Number 16. Twins can share the same form. In the quiet shadows of the Room of Requirement, where hidden things dwell and secrets breathe, there lingers a tale few ever thought to tell. Among the many mysteries of magic, the nature of the Patronus charm has remained one of the most enigmatic. It is not just a spell. It is an expression of the soul, a silvery beacon born from one's happiest memory and deepest hope. And yet, in very rare cases, the form this powerful magic takes can reveal more than just the caster's individual nature. It can expose a connection between two people so profound their spirits echo through one another. Fred and George Weasley were never just brothers. They were a single force, a hurricane of laughter and mischief, storming the halls of Hogwarts with a charm all their own. It is often said they were two halves of the same mind, finishing each other's thoughts, creating inventions in sync, and pranking with a unity that seemed more magical than any spell. Their lives, thoughts, even ambitions were nearly indistinguishable. But according to a lesser-known entry in the Hogwarts archives, documents not accessible to the average student, the twins may have shared something even deeper, the exact same Patronus. Patronuses, as we are taught, reflect the caster's inner essence. Harry Potter's took the form of a stag, much like his father's, signifying nobility, strength, and a connection to lineage and loyalty. Hermione Granger's otter Patronus mirrored her sharp intellect and love for order and cleverness. Each form is a silent echo of who the witch or wizard is beneath all masks. So the idea that two different individuals could summon the same animal is, at first glance, almost contradictory. But when the bond between them transcends individuality, magic itself listens. The claim that Fred and George each produced a fox Patronus has never been officially confirmed by any of the professors. Yet the rumour has persisted quietly past among older students who remember the twins' defence against the dark arts classes. In the final year before Fred left Hogwarts, Professor Flitwick reportedly caught a glimpse of two silvery foxes darting between the desks during a Patronus lesson, indistinguishable in shape, size, and gait. Whether it was intentional or not, the story remained tucked away, unmentioned in official class logs but noted in marginalia within Flitwick's own enchanted notebook, later donated to the school's restricted archival collection. Why a fox? The symbolism fits. Cunning, playful, and swift, foxes are creatures of cleverness and charm. In mythology, they often outwit enemies with grace, much like Fred and George outmaneuvered Filch, Umbridge, and countless others. Their products at Weasley's Wizard Wheezes weren't just jokes. They were inventions of brilliant design requiring foresight, experimentation, and a dash of danger. Exactly the kind of creativity a fox embodies. Even the way they walked, slightly hunched with grins stretching across their freckled faces, carried a vulpine energy. There's more evidence than whispers. Angelina Johnson, longtime friend of the twins and later George's wife, once confided to a journalist from the Daily Prophet that she saw them practice Patronus magic during a quiet summer evening at the Burrow. "It was just before Fred and George left school for good," she said. "They were testing out new fireworks and had gotten worried about Dementor protection, especially with how things were turning in the ministry. I remember looking out the kitchen window and seeing these two bright shapes chasing each other across the field. Foxes. I know what I saw." This shared form defies standard magical theory. Professor Lupin once explained, "The Patronus is the very embodiment of hope, the antithesis of fear. Only the strongest, most positive emotions fuel it." The implication is clear. The shape it takes is unique to each person. But if that is always true, how do we explain the foxes? Dumbledore himself admitted that magic is, in essence, deeply personal, but it also listens to connection. In a rare letter to Elphias Doge, he once mused about Patronus synchronicity, writing, "I have seen in only 3 cases in my lifetime the phenomenon of twin Patronuses, never between strangers, nor even lovers, but between two who shared a mind and heart from the start of their lives. One of these cases," he suggested, involved twin witches in 18th century France, whose shared Patronuses were snow hares, always bounding side by side, never separating even when cast independently. Fred and George, then, would not be an anomaly, but a testament to something even rarer than magical genius, the bond of absolute unity. Their foxes, according to those who saw them, never strayed from each other. In movement, they mirrored one another. In timing, they emerged together. Some observers claimed it was like watching one soul split into two silvery forms. The emotional strength of a twin bond is well documented in both magical and Muggle psychological studies, but when layered with magic, it creates unpredictable results. George, after the Battle of Hogwarts, was never quite the same. Friends say his magic dimmed, grew erratic for a time. He could still joke, still run the shop, but when asked if he could still produce a Patronus, he never gave a straight answer. There is an unspoken belief among those closest to him that the loss of Fred disrupted his ability to conjure one, as if the memory that once gave him joy had been drained of its magic. Molly Weasley, in her grief, once told Arthur, Fred took half of George's laughter with him, but it may have been more literal than poetic. In the months after Fred's death, George's spellwork faltered only when attempting anything that required emotional anchoring, Amortentia identification, boggart confrontation, and of course the Patronus charm. The loss wasn't just of a brother, but of a mirrored soul, and magic mourned with him. Some magical scholars believe this is evidence that Patronus forms are not fixed solely to the individual, but can be influenced by deep, lifelong bonds. Professor Wilhelmina Tufte, who wrote Of Shadows and Silver, the Patronus and the Human Spirit, speculated that, in cases of extraordinary connection, magic ceases to distinguish between two people. It sees them as one, even if they cast independently. The Patronus responds not just to joy, but to shared identity. The foxes of Fred and George, if real, would serve as proof. Unlike inherited forms, such as Harry's stag derived from James Potter, their shared fox was born not of bloodline, but of parallel lives. They were not reflections of a father, but of each other. A magical affirmation that they were never meant to be seen apart. What happened to George's fox after Fred's death remains uncertain. Some claim that when he finally dared to try again, only wisps of mist emerged. Others say the fox still came, but alone, its silvery light dimmer, its playful steps subdued. Angelina once hinted he never said what he saw that night, but I think it was still a fox. Only it stopped chasing shadows and just stood still, waiting for the other one. This small detail, hidden in unconfirmed accounts and heartfelt testimonies, opens the door to a wider understanding of magic's emotional depth. It also raises the possibility that other magical twins or bonded siblings may have experienced similar synchronicities. It makes us wonder how many more unrecorded foxes, hares, or swans once danced in quiet corners of magical schools, unseen by the world, but profoundly felt by the ones who conjured them. Even in death, the bond may linger. The Patronus is, after all, not a ghost, but a memory given shape. For George, the fox may remain both a comfort and a curse, a living reminder of someone who is always missing, but never truly gone. And perhaps in those rare moments when the sky is clear and the world is quiet, two foxes still run side by side in the moonlit fields beyond the burrow. One summoned by magic, the other summoned by memory. It is this kind of story, half history, half whispered legend, that keeps the wizarding world so alive in the minds of its people. Fred and George's tale is not just one of laughter and loss, it's a lesson in the ways magic listens, in how it bends not only to knowledge or power, but to love. In every silvery fox darting through the shadows, there's a trace of something more than a spell. There is devotion, there is memory, there is the unbreakable thread between two hearts that once beat in perfect time. Number 17, Patronuses can appear instinctively. On a rain-lashed evening in the year 1723, deep in the Welsh valley of Bydwen, a village nestled between brooding mountains and whispering forests fell silent under the pressure of an unnatural cold. It was not the kind of chill one could simply shake off with a cup of tea or the warmth of a fire. It was a suffocating, soul-numbing cold that seemed to bleed into the marrow of the bones. No one knew it yet, but a Dementor had entered the valley, and one boy, 14-year-old Merrick Tarley, would become the center of a story that would puzzle magical scholars for centuries. Merrick was no hero. The son of a local wand-maker and a squib mother, he had lived a quiet, actually uneventful life, helping in the family shop and wandering the edge of the forest where his mother once claimed to have seen a unicorn. He had not yet begun formal magical training, and his use of spells was limited to accidental magic, an occasional floating teacup or a stubborn door that opened when he stared hard enough. He had never heard the words expecto patronum, nor read of the Patronus charm in any book. That night, when the Dementor descended, it did not come with the shriek of terror that accompanies wild curses. It came silently, with creeping shadows and air too heavy to breathe. Villagers spoke later of frost on their windows and the crying of unseen infants. Merrick had gone to the well to draw water for his ailing mother. The bucket had barely touched the surface when the darkness gripped him. The world tilted sideways. Every happiness he had ever known, the smell of his father's pipe, the comfort of his mother's lullabies, the wonder he once felt seeing sparks shoot from his fingers, evaporated. All that remained was despair. Then, without thought, without wand, without a single word, something erupted from within him, a sharp, pure force that shattered the invisible weight pressing on his chest. Before his eyes, a bird of light soared into existence. Not a dove or a phoenix, but a massive raven, silver as moonlight and twice the size of any real bird. It beat its wings once, and the air around Merrick warmed. Twice, and the Dementor recoiled. With a third cry, the creature fled, chased into the trees by the glowing raven whose feathers left sparks in the night air. No one could explain it. Merrick's parents had not taught him the spell. He had no wand in hand. The words had never been spoken. Yet what occurred that night could not be denied. Merrick Tarley had produced a full corporeal Patronus, without instruction, without incantation, and without intent. The ministry dispatched officials within days, fearing uncontrolled dark magic. What they found instead was a boy confused and exhausted, his magical core humming with an energy that defied classification. This event became a curiosity filed away in the Department of Magical Anomalies until centuries later, the modern era brought a renewed fascination with the rare phenomenon of spontaneous Patronus manifestation. For while most witches and wizards train rigorously to conjure a Patronus, often requiring months of focused study, emotional clarity, and memory mastery, Merrick's case proved that under extraordinary circumstances, a Patronus could arise from sheer instinct. Albus Dumbledore once said, "You think the dead we loved ever truly leave us? You think that we don't recall them more clearly than ever in times of great trouble? The Patronus, above all, is the embodiment of memory. It feeds on the power of light within darkness, joy within despair. Most need to call upon a memory, but Merrick's emotional reservoir had burst the dam. His love for his mother, his desire to protect, and his unspoken grief over her illness combined in a single moment of magical eruption. The raven Patronus itself was notable. While the raven is a common symbol in Celtic magic, often associated with transformation, prophecy, and protection, it is rarely seen as a Patronus form. Records from the 18th century list only 2 other known cases of a raven Patronus, both from magical seers who lived as hermits in the Scottish Highlands. Some scholars now suggest that the form may connect to latent magical sight or an instinctive link to ancestral memory. Merrick's case remained singular for over 100 years, until the 19th century appearance of another untrained wizard whose spontaneous Patronus saved lives during the outbreak of Dementor sightings near Bristol. Her name was Elspeth Broom, a Muggleborn healer who had never studied charms. While tending to an injured child, Elspeth witnessed a Dementor approaching. With no wand and only a half-formed idea of danger, she screamed, and from her hands burst a glowing badger, which drove the creature into the hills. She collapsed afterward, barely conscious, but the child survived. These rare cases demonstrate something often overlooked in the study of the Patronus charm, that it is not merely a spell but a spiritual conduit. It is not summoned through knowledge alone but by the deepest stirrings of love, protection, and identity. Remus Lupin told Harry Potter in Prisoner of Azkaban, the Patronus is a kind of positive force, a projection of the very things that the Dementor feeds upon: hope, happiness, the desire to survive. But Merrick Tarley had no concept of hope in that moment. He acted only from instinct, and that instinct summoned magic greater than anything he had learned. What makes Merrick's story particularly compelling is not just the mystery of his Patronus, but what followed. After the incident, he began formal training at Hogwarts, admitted directly into Ravenclaw, perhaps fitting for the form of his Patronus. Teachers noted that his magical strength was erratic, sometimes brilliant, sometimes absent altogether. But when Dementors were mentioned, he trembled. His Patronus would no longer appear on command. It had been born once in truth, and would not come again until he was near death in a later encounter, during the Goblin rebellions of 1736. That second appearance confirmed it. The Patronus could be tied to mortal fear and primal instinct. In the middle of a skirmish, as a squadron of dark creatures aligned with rebellious factions turned their rage toward a group of trapped students, Merrick, then a teacher himself, stood in the way. Again the raven came, its eyes glowing, its wings like blades of light. Merrick survived, barely. But he never cast another Patronus after that day, as if the magic had spent itself. Interestingly, the concept of an involuntary Patronus aligns with the notion of magic beyond spells, a phrase used by older magical traditions, particularly in pre-Hogwarts Scottish lore, to describe bursts of power that manifested in extreme emotional states. These outbursts were often dismissed as folklore until cases like Merrick's and Elspeth's began resurfacing in academic discourse. The late 20th century saw a brief resurgence of interest in such phenomena, especially after Harry Potter's well-publicized battles with Dementors. In Harry's case, though he learned the spell from Remus Lupin and practiced it consciously, the power behind his Patronus, a stag, was undeniably tied to his love for his parents and his will to resist despair. In Order of the Phoenix, when he saves Dudley and himself from a pair of Dementors in Little Whinging, he later tells his godfather, Sirius Black, "It wasn't even a happy memory, it was just the idea that I might see them again, and it worked." This parallels Merrick's experience, the Patronus drawn not from happiness but from need, from longing. There is also the question of wandless magic. While rare, it is not unheard of. However, casting a charm as complex as Expecto Patronum without a wand is considered nearly impossible by standard magical theory. That Merrick did so twice, in moments of life and death, speaks to the idea that the Patronus, more than many other spells, is rooted not in technical skill, but in the raw nature of the caster's heart. Dumbledore once reflected on this power when he said, "Words are, in my not-so-humble opinion, our most inexhaustible source of magic, but there is magic beyond them." The Patronus in its purest form might be just that, an unspoken shield of the soul, a luminous creature shaped by everything we are, not everything we know. Merrick Tarley died in 1762, leaving behind a slim volume titled Of Light and Shadow, Observations on Patronus Magic, which remains in the restricted section of the Hogwarts Library. In it he writes, "I believe the Patronus is not summoned but revealed. It is the memory of who we are, given form. The words are only a key. Some doors, under pressure, burst open without one." In later years, Professor Minerva McGonagall would reference Merrick's case in a lecture on advanced defensive charms. She noted that while teaching the Patronus was essential, instructors should never underestimate the unseen strength in their students. "Some magic," she said, resides in silence. We are only beginning to understand it. And so, Merrick Tarley, an otherwise forgotten name in magical history, remains a testament to a hidden truth. The Patronus charm, for all its elegance, is not merely a product of memorization or instruction. It is born, sometimes violently, from the deepest reaches of love, fear, and memory. And in very rare, beautiful moments, it appears not when summoned, but when needed most. Number 18. Magical creatures can't cast them. The Patronus charm remains one of the most extraordinary spells in the wizarding world, not only because of its elegance, but also because of what it demands from the caster. It is not born from anger or raw magical force. It doesn't rely on external objects or even wand movements alone. It is forged in the deepest furnace of the human soul, the place where memory meets emotion. And yet, for all its beauty and importance, there is a strange, rarely discussed limitation, one that reveals something profound about magic itself. Animals and even magical creatures cannot conjure a Patronus. The wizarding world is teeming with magical beings, from the mysterious Thestrals to the proud centaurs of the Forbidden Forest, from the mischievous house elves in the kitchens of Hogwarts to the goblins counting gold at Gringotts. It is easy to assume that such creatures, capable of spellwork, flight, or language, might also be able to summon a Patronus. But no recorded case exists of a non-human conjuring one. This is not merely a technical limitation, it speaks to the nature of what the Patronus truly is. Patronus is not simply light made solid, it is the embodiment of hope, memory, and the will to overcome despair. The incantation, Expecto Patronum, does not work unless the wizard or witch can access a specific memory, one that is powerful not because it is merely happy, but because it is rooted in love, safety, or purpose. When Harry Potter first managed to conjure a corporeal Patronus, it was not due to his immense magical strength, but because he believed he had already seen it done by his father. The emotional illusion gave him the strength needed. "I knew I could do it this time," he says, "because I'd already done it." It was memory wrapped in feeling and belief layered upon both. It is for this reason that the Patronus is bound so intimately to the human psyche, not to the human body or bloodline, but to the very structure of human thought, symbolic, abstract, capable of reliving and reshaping moments from the past with meaning and interpretation. A wolf may remember a scent, a phoenix may return to the place of its death. But only a human can reframe a traumatic experience into a source of power. Only a human can transform grief into gratitude or fear into resilience. Consider the house elves. No creatures are more tragically misunderstood. Their magic is powerful, so much so that it ignores many of the limitations placed upon wands. Dobby, for instance, could apparate within Hogwarts, something not even Albus Dumbledore could do without bypassing the castle's protections. And yet when Dobby wanted to protect Harry, when he wanted to defend himself or his friends, he never once called upon a Patronus. Not because he lacked courage or because his intentions weren't noble, but because the magic of the Patronus was never given to him, or perhaps more accurately, it was never born within him. In a forgotten manuscript buried in the restricted section of the Hogwarts Library, catalogued only as Scrolls on Non-Human Magic, Volume 2, there is a curious passage that describes an experiment by a long-dead professor named Tiberius Minx. Minx was a scholar of cross-species magical behavior. According to his notes, he spent 3 years working with a house elf named Solway, attempting to induce the casting of a Patronus. Solway was exceptionally intelligent, fluent in 3 languages, and intensely loyal to Minx. Yet even after hundreds of attempts, she never once produced even a wisp of silvery light. What makes Minx's notes more unsettling is what he observed during these failed trials. Solway began to express confusion, emotional confusion, not magical. She could mimic joy, express loyalty, even weep. But when asked to summon a moment of pure happiness, she did not understand what that meant. "Solway smiles when Master smiles," she said once. Is that Solway's happy? In this small phrase, Minx may have discovered something chilling. The inner life of a magical creature might not mirror the human emotional spectrum. It may run parallel, but not identical. In Order of the Phoenix, when Harry teaches the DA how to cast Patronuses, none of the centaur portraits nor the ghosts comment on their own abilities to use the charm. Even the ghost of nearly headless Nick, who often offers unsolicited opinions, says nothing. That silence speaks volumes. Magical sentience does not equate to the ability to project a Patronus. Even centaurs, proud and wise, do not attempt to use it. Firenze, who walks among humans and teaches at Hogwarts, never utters the incantation, not once. Though gifted with prophecy and strength, he is not aligned with this form of magic. There is a unique kind of energy to the Patronus, one that doesn't only dispel Dementors, but also strengthens those nearby. In The Half-Blood Prince, we are told that when Tonks casts a Patronus to deliver a message, its presence fills the room with a warmth that others can feel. The Patronus is not just a spell, it is a transference of hope broadcasted into the world. This effect is particularly interesting in light of a second fragment from the same scrolls Minx kept. In a footnote, another scholar, Belvina Hopkirk, recorded that during the First Wizarding War, several house elves stationed at Hogwarts as part of the underground resistance appeared visibly energized when near a human Patronus. One elf, Bricky, was reportedly able to teleport further and with more accuracy after being in the presence of a glowing lynx Patronus sent by Kingsley Shacklebolt. Whether this is coincidence or some form of magical osmosis remains uncertain, but it hints at a fascinating truth. Even if they cannot cast Patronuses, magical creatures might resonate with their energy. It is worth asking, why would nature, or perhaps the magic that underlies nature, create such a divide? If the Patronus is so potent, why restrict it to humans? The answer may lie in a line Dumbledore once said, "You think the dead we loved ever truly leave us? You think that we don't recall them more clearly than ever in times of great trouble?" The Patronus is, at its core, about remembrance, not memory as data, but memory as flame. It is about turning love into a shield. In the Deathly Hallows, Snape's Patronus, always a doe, remains his only true act of pure emotion. It is his confession, his monument, and his redemption. That a man as broken and morally compromised as Severus Snape could still produce such a Patronus after decades of pain shows that the charm does not judge us by our actions but by our ability to feel. There is no reason to believe a magical creature, even a loyal one like Creature, could carry such inner conflict and still produce light. And then there is the matter of shape. Each Patronus is unique, moulded by the soul of its caster. Luna Lovegood's hair is as airy and curious as she is. Cho Chang's swan reflects elegance tinged with grief. The fact that no animal has ever produced a Patronus suggests that they do not possess the necessary interior symbolism. Even intelligent creatures like goblins, who feel deeply about honor, heritage, and gold, have never summoned one. One goblin, Ragnok the Elder, was rumored to try during a Dementor attack at the Battle of the Ministry. He raised his dagger and chanted words in gobbledygook, but produced only sparks. It is not a matter of intelligence, nor is it about raw magical strength. The dragon is more powerful than any aura. The acromantula is cunning and capable of speech, but it is not enough. The Patronus is, perhaps, the most human spell ever devised. Not because it is the most advanced, but because it is the most personal. Its power depends entirely on the ability to draw meaning from pain, to craft memory into a weapon. Even the nature of Dementors reveals this truth. They do not feed on flesh or bone, but on the mind, on trauma, fear, and memory. The only defense against them is not steel or fire, but hope, and that hope must be internalized and projected. An owl cannot do that. A unicorn, despite its purity, lives in instinct, not reflection. And the thestral, ironically, the only beast to understand death, lives in silence. It is tempting to imagine a world where house elves could cast Patronuses, where centaurs might defend the forest with silver stallions. But perhaps their power lies elsewhere. A house elf's magic is raw and instinctive, capable of deflecting curses, moving objects, and defying barriers. It is tied to service and intent. The Patronus, however, is tied to identity. It is not just what you feel, but who you are. One final passage from Minx's scrolls stands out. After years of failure, he asked Solwi what she would do if a Dementor came near. Solwi would hold Master's hand, she said. Solwi would not need light if Master is safe. It is a simple answer, a beautiful one, but it is not the answer of someone who would cast a Patronus. It is the answer of someone who lives through others, not within themselves. The Patronus is, in that sense, a mirror. It does not lie. It shows us who we are in our most radiant form, if only for a moment. That no animal or creature can summon one does not make them less magical. It simply means their magic dances to another rhythm. Theirs is the song of nature, of survival, of loyalty. The Patronus belongs to the inner world of humans, flawed, fragile, but brilliant in ways even the stars do not fully understand. Number 19, it can be passed down through generations. In the dense archives of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, where ancient parchment curls with time and dust settles thick as secrets, lies a lesser-known truth about the Patronus charm, a truth that contradicts what most wizards believe. While it is commonly accepted that the shape of a Patronus is unique to its caster, a reflection of the soul, shaped by love, trauma, and identity, there are rare instances where the form of a Patronus persists, generation after generation, passed down like a treasured heirloom. This phenomenon has been studied quietly away from the headlines of the Daily Prophet, and it finds its most vivid illustration in the lineage of the Malsator family of the Scottish Highlands. The Malsators, an ancient wizarding clan nestled between the moors and shadowed pine forests of Caithness, have for over 300 years produced a Patronus in the shape of a silver stag with black antlers. Not just any stag, but one described in detail in multiple eyewitness accounts as regal, solemn, and taller than any living deer. Magical historians from the early 1800s to modern day have confirmed this repetition, with pensive memories and written testimony from auras and ministry officials backing the claim. What makes this detail even more intriguing is not the consistency alone, but the family philosophy that appears to engineer it. Unlike the spontaneous, unpredictable emergence of Patronus forms we are familiar with, where Hermione Granger's otter differs entirely from Ron Weasley's Jack Russell Terrier, despite their closeness, the Malsator legacy reveals a different mechanism, inheritance shaped by tradition. Within their family manor, surrounded by dark stone and heavier silences, the Malsators upheld a strict code of conduct, where children were raised not merely to obey, but to mirror. They learned the same spells, read the same books, celebrated the same holidays with the same rituals, and revered a family ancestry that was elevated nearly to religion. This relentless repetition of values, beliefs, and fears had a curious effect. It molded their very magical essence into a shape echoing the past. Gideon Malsator, born in 1771 and recorded in the Ministry's Registry of Defensive Magic Practitioners, was the first known bearer of the black-antlered stag. His Patronus was famously spotted during the Goblin riots of 1794, when he defended a village near Fort William from a rebel attack. A half-century later, his grandson Edric conjured the same form during a duel with a rogue banshee in the Lake District. The black antlers, shimmering against the silver light, were so distinctive that a nearby witch recorded them in a journal now housed in the British Museum of Magical History. What set the Malsaters apart was their belief that magic is not simply a tool, but a vessel of memory. In their view, each spell carried not only power, but history. To cast a Patronus, therefore, was not just to summon light against darkness, it was to invoke the very spirit of their lineage. "When I call the stag," wrote Elsinora Malsater in her 1912 memoir, Rituals of the Bloodline, "I do not cast it. I remember it. I become it. It is not mine. It is ours." Her words reflect the essence of their magical tradition, identity as a communal inheritance, not individual freedom. It is important to note that this phenomenon is extremely rare. Most magical families, even those deeply entwined with blood purity and heritage like the Malfoys or the Blacks, do not produce generational Patronuses. The Blacks, for example, prided themselves on legacy, but Sirius Black's Patronus, should he ever have produced one, is never mentioned to resemble that of any family member. Instead, Sirius's animagus form, a large black dog, stood in stark contrast to the personalities of those who raised him. This divergence serves to illustrate how upbringing can fail to override personal resistance. The Malsaters, by contrast, did not resist, they embraced. Some scholars argue that the magical similarity among Malsater generations is a form of self-fulfilling prophecy. By retelling the story of Gideon's stag over and over to their children, the family may have created an emotional blueprint strong enough to override the individuality typically embedded in the Patronus charm. In this theory, each generation's young witch or wizard, consciously or unconsciously, shaped their happiest memory into something that aligned with the ancestral tale. The silver stag with black antlers was not imposed upon them by blood, but by belief. Still, belief alone is not enough to conjure a Patronus. As Remus Lupin once explained to Harry Potter, the Patronus is a kind of positive force, a projection of the very things that the Dementor feeds upon: hope, happiness, the desire to survive. The Malsaters, despite their dark and rigid family customs, preserved an inner fire. The stag, strong and proud, was their beacon of survival, not only from Dementors, but from the decay of time and irrelevance. The family's internal unity gave their magic a singular focus. Yet not all Malsaters could conjure a Patronus. Several records, including ministry files classified until the 1980s, show that during times of internal family conflict, particularly in the 1920s when cousin turned against cousin in a bitter inheritance feud, the Patronus tradition faltered. One branch of the family, relocated to Kent, began producing indistinct, misty Patronuses or none at all. This breakdown suggests that the inheritance of a Patronus form is not tied to bloodline alone, but to the ideological harmony that underpins it. In the absence of unity, the spell reverts to its unpredictable, deeply personal form. By the late 20th century, the Malsater family had dwindled in both number and influence. Their last known heir, Thaddeus Malsater, worked quietly as a researcher in the Department of Mysteries and avoided public life. But even Thaddeus, as obscure as he was, maintained the family practice. In an aura training demonstration observed by Kingsley Shacklebolt in 1994, Thaddeus summoned the same black-antlered stag his ancestors had. "It was like watching a ghost," Shacklebolt later told a colleague, "not just of a man, but of a memory trying not to die." The case of the Malsaters has prompted further research into other families with similar traditions, though no other example has matched its consistency. A few lesser-known clans in Eastern Europe have shown signs of Patronus repetition, an owl reappearing across 3 generations of the Dragomir family in Romania, and a lynx among the Danish Olofsons, but none have documented the precise detail and longevity of the Malsater stag. It seems that such magical inheritance demands not only tradition, but total devotion to sameness. Interestingly, the Malsater phenomenon also adds a deeper layer of interpretation to some scenes in the Harry Potter series. When Harry's Patronus takes the form of a stag, many readers interpret it purely as a reflection of his father, James Potter, whose animagus form and Patronus were both stags. However, this repetition also subtly points to the strength of inherited love and admiration. Harry never met his father, but the emotional stories he was told shaped his understanding of protection and identity. It is not bloodline alone that forges magical resemblance. It is the emotional connection to memory and meaning. Albus Dumbledore once remarked, "Youth cannot know how age thinks and feels, but old men are guilty if they forget what it was to be young." The Malsaters, it seems, chose never to forget. They crafted their children in the image of their dead, not out of nostalgia, but out of strategy, to preserve power through predictability. While other families allowed their magical lineage to evolve, the Malsaters designed it to repeat. Their Patronus, therefore, became not only a defense charm, but a living monument. In the rare conversations held at Hogwarts about Patronus forms, students are taught that their shape may change over time, especially after emotional transformations such as falling in love or experiencing trauma. This fluidity is seen in Tonks, whose Patronus shifted to reflect her love for Remus Lupin. But the Malsater case presents a counterpoint. What happens when emotion is not transformative but reinforced over generations? What happens when love itself is taught in the same way, generation after generation, so that it always carries the same form? The black-antlered stag of the Malsaters has never been found in any other known family. It is distinct in its eerie details, its supernatural sheen, and its aura of melancholic majesty. Witnesses describe its eyes as darker than obsidian, like twin pools of ancestral silence, as one poet-turned-magi-zoologist wrote in The Stag and the Shadow. When the Patronus appears, it does not gallop, it walks, slowly, as if haunted by memory. This phenomenon has raised ethical debates in magical pedagogy. Is it right to teach a child that their joy should look like their great-grandfather's? That their Patronus should mirror the triumph of an ancestor rather than reflect their own? Critics argue that such traditions limit magical self-expression. Supporters, however, claim it's no different than preserving a family wand or crest. In both cases, the object becomes an anchor to identity. The debate remains unresolved, though a small movement within the Magical Education Reform Committee has proposed that children be discouraged from studying family Patronus forms until after their own first successful casting. Ultimately, the Patronus is still a deeply personal spell, but the Malsater family reveals its full complexity. The charm does not just protect, it remembers, it binds, and in rare hands it can echo across centuries like a song with only one verse. As wizards and witches continue to conjure light from their happiest memories, the silver stag with black antlers remains a quiet marvel of magical history, moving through the mist of time, carrying not just a spell, but a legacy. Number 20, it can't be fueled by anger. Of all the spells whispered through the hallowed halls of Hogwarts, none carries the same emotional weight as the Patronus charm. To summon a Patronus is not just to cast a spell, it is to invite light to stand against darkness, but not all light burns with the same fire. Unlike most magical incantations which draw strength from urgency or even fury, Expecto Patronum demands something rare and difficult, serenity. It is a paradox in the wizarding world where most spells flourish under the pressure of adrenaline, yet this one withers when channeled through anger. This is not a theory, but a fact woven into the fabric of the spell itself. When a witch or wizard attempts to summon a Patronus in a fit of rage, the charm falters. Instead of a magnificent silver creature bounding forth to defend its caster, the magic fizzles into nothing, or worse, a pale wisp emerges, shivering into the air before dissolving. This is because the Patronus charm does not respond to aggression. It is not forged in the heat of fury, but born from peace, hope, and above all, joy. Professor Lupin explained this subtly to Harry Potter in their third year, guiding him through the initial lessons in defense against the dark arts. The Patronus is a kind of positive force, a projection of the very things that the Dementor feeds upon: hope, happiness, the desire to survive, Lupin taught. And while the lesson focused on the need for a powerful memory to fuel the charm, what often goes unspoken is that the emotional state at the time of casting is just as critical. Consider the failure of Marcus Belby, a lesser-known student in Ravenclaw during the years just before the Second Wizarding War. Though intelligent and talented, Marcus struggled with producing a corporeal Patronus. It was later understood that Belby, carrying deep-seated anger over the loss of a sibling to Death Eaters, consistently approached the spell with clenched fists and a seething need for vengeance. His Patronus, when it appeared at all, was little more than a frail wisp of vapour. Professors Flitwick and McGonagall attempted to help him, but only when Marcus began healing emotionally, allowing grief to coexist with cherished memories, did his Patronus finally manifest as a falcon. This underscores a critical distinction between the Patronus and other defensive spells. A Stupefy or Expelliarmus grows stronger when the caster is determined, even furious. But the Patronus, it repels creatures like Dementors, which are not physical beings but emotional predators. They feast on fear, yes, but also on anger. Any emotion that darkens the soul, a Patronus must by contrast radiate something untainted. There is a profound moment in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix when Harry, overwhelmed by guilt and confusion after the death of Sirius Black, tries to practice the Patronus charm during a Dumbledore's army session. Though he had previously produced a strong, corporeal stag, in that moment he struggles. The memory he calls upon falters under the weight of his grief. Harry raised his wand, but the stag never came. Instead, only a thin silver mist escaped the tip, and even that faded quickly, the book recounts. His internal landscape was too clouded by pain and rage. The Patronus, sensitive to the emotional harmony of its caster, did not respond. It is not that negative emotions destroy magic, far from it. Anger has propelled great wizards into formidable power. But the Patronus charm belongs to a rare family of spells that defy the usual logic of magical force. It demands emotional discipline. To use it effectively, a wizard must step out of fear, away from vengeance, and stand in a place of emotional clarity. It is a kind of meditative magic, requiring the caster to remember not only happiness, but to feel it in real time. One of the most iconic examples of this is seen in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. During the escape from the wedding, when Harry and his friends are ambushed in London, they find themselves in a tight alley with Dementors descending. Ron attempts the Patronus charm, but to no avail. He had been emotionally shaken after the collapse of the wedding, and worse, furious at himself for freezing under pressure. Hermione, too, fails in her first attempt. It is only Harry, recalling the moment he first flew on a broomstick, who succeeds. His stag burst forth, clear, strong, and defiant against the swarming Dementors. This scene illustrates another hidden truth. A Patronus is as much about presence as it is about memory. The memory itself is a trigger, a vessel to access joy. But the wizard must allow that joy to take over their being. If they are too consumed by terror or anger, the memory becomes just a thought, not a feeling. And the charm, sensing the discord, refuses to answer. This is why the Patronus is so rare. Even among skilled witches and wizards, few can consistently produce a corporeal form. The Ministry of Magic kept detailed records of those who could, often deploying them as Dementor wardens. But their selection criteria went beyond raw magical skill. Emotional stability, empathy, and moral clarity were prized. Aura records from the First Wizarding War reveal that several powerful duelists, though formidable in battle, never succeeded in casting a full Patronus, their hearts simply too embittered by the violence they had witnessed. Among the many stories preserved by the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, one stands out, that of Elspeth Marchbanks, a young witch who lost her family to a werewolf attack during the 1970s. She joined the ministry with a mission of revenge, but her Patronus, a unicorn, would never form when she thought of her family's deaths. It was only during a moment of unexpected kindness, comforting a frightened Muggle child who had seen magic, that she produced a brilliant Patronus, shining with such purity that it held off a dozen Dementors during a field mission. Elspeth later reflected that the Patronus didn't come from my pain. It came from what I did with it. This lesson was not lost on Dumbledore, who often spoke in cryptic riddles but understood this magic intimately. He once told Harry, "Happiness can be found even in the darkest of times, if one only remembers to turn on the light." The metaphor was not idle. In teaching the Patronus charm to advanced members of the Order of the Phoenix, Dumbledore emphasized not just technique, but mindset. To him, the Patronus was not a weapon, but a philosophy, a reminder that light must be chosen even when darkness seems more honest. Dolores Umbridge, for all her cruelty, famously conjured a corporeal Patronus while working at the ministry, a fact that puzzles many, but upon inspection one sees that her Patronus, a cat, was the product not of goodness but of a twisted self-satisfaction. Her joy came from control, from the belief in her own righteousness. It was a perversion of the spell's intent, and though technically successful, her Patronus lacked the warmth seen in others. It was powerful, yes, but hollow, a cold flame. Compare this to Luna Lovegood, whose Patronus, a hare, embodied her quiet optimism. Luna, often mocked for her dreamy disposition, possessed a strength of spirit unshaken by mockery or fear. Her charm was delicate yet unwavering, driven not by ego or vengeance, but by wonder. Her light was pure, and the magic responded accordingly. Even Severus Snape, a man torn between hatred and love, could produce a corporeal Patronus, the silver doe that mirrored Lily Potter's. But his case is the most tragic example of this charm's complexity. For Snape, the memory that fueled his Patronus was not happy, but sacred. His love for Lily was buried beneath bitterness, but never extinguished. In casting his Patronus, he was not angry, he was reverent. That is why it worked. It is also why Harry's own Patronus, the stag, remained consistent throughout the series. Despite the traumas he endured, despite his brushes with death and betrayal, Harry retained a childlike core of hope. Even in battle, even when broken, he could remember flying, laughter, friendship. He carried his light, not as a weapon, but as a shield. The Patronus is not a declaration of power, but a whisper of grace. It does not roar, it sings. It asks not for might, but for truth. And in a world so often split by conflict and shadow, the ability to summon joy, even fleeting, is the rarest and most magical gift of all. Number 21. Some wizards keep theirs secret. There is magic so personal that even the most courageous witches and wizards dare not unveil it. Among the many spells that define a witch's strength and resilience, the Patronus charm remains one of the most intimate, an ethereal guardian conjured from one's happiest memory and purest self. While some conjure their Patronus with pride and display it in battle or public demonstration, others hide it with the same fervor one might reserve for a deep wound or sacred relic. In the hidden corners of the magical world, stories whisper of witches and wizards who never allow their Patronus to be seen, choosing instead to protect its form, origin, and meaning with obsessive secrecy. The Patronus is not just a shield against Dementors, it is a reflection of one's inner spirit. That alone is reason enough for some witches and wizards to conceal theirs. The form it takes, whether a lion, a fox, or a squirrel, speaks volumes. In a society where bloodlines, loyalties, and personal narratives carry great weight, such a manifestation can act as a silent confession. A person whose Patronus is identical to a known criminal, a creature associated with weakness, or a being considered ominous, might find themselves subjected to judgment or scrutiny. Albertine Crow, the oldest surviving professor of Beauxbatons Academy of Magic, is said to have never revealed her Patronus, not once, not even during demonstrations in her advanced charms class. Students often whispered about it behind closed dormitory doors. She had taught for more than 80 years, her name etched into generations of spellcasters. When asked in a rare interview why she had never shown her Patronus, she simply replied, "There is magic that belongs only to the heart. I do not share it even with a mirror." Those words, mysterious and quiet, have become almost legendary among Beauxbatons alumni. No one could confirm whether she could conjure a Patronus at all, and no one dared ask again. There is historical precedent for such secrecy. In the early 19th century, the wizard Alric Dunmore, a celebrated historian and magical theorist, famously burned his personal journals, fearing that descriptions of his Patronus might be used against him in political circles. He had once worked with the Ministry of Magic in the Department of Mysteries, but resigned after whispers arose about the peculiar nature of his Patronus, something many believed to be a thestral. The thestral, though a noble and misunderstood creature, is associated with death and loss. To many in the wizarding world, it marked Alric as morbid, haunted, or possibly dangerous. The spell Expecto Patronum is not simply a matter of magical ability, it requires profound emotional clarity. A Patronus is not forced from the wand like a curse or shield charm, it is called forth from the soul. Some witches and wizards cannot conjure one at all, not because they lack power, but because their memories are not strong enough to push back the dark. But for those who can and still choose not to, it says something even deeper. There are fears more subtle than dementors and secrets more delicate than spells. Consider the case of Helena Rossby, an unspeakable whose life remains largely undocumented. She worked during the height of Grindelwald's rise, assigned to protect magical intelligence that could alter the outcome of the war. It is believed she developed a silent variant of the Patronus charm that created no visible form, only a pulse of warmth that repelled dementors silently. In wartime, this was useful, but Rossby, when later asked by a colleague what her actual Patronus was, left only a note behind. "It would reveal the part of me I've tried to forget." This emotional vulnerability explains why, despite its effectiveness, the Patronus charm is rarely used outside of necessity. Even Albus Dumbledore, whose Patronus was known to be a phoenix, did not often call it forth before crowds. Though he was open about it, he did not flaunt it. The phoenix, after all, is a creature tied to death, rebirth, sacrifice. In many ways it mirrors Dumbledore's life, loss of family, his complicated past with Grindelwald, and his burdens as the leader of the resistance. That he could produce a Patronus at all is a testament to his strength, but also to the complexity of his internal world. Severus Snape's Patronus remains one of the most haunting examples of concealed identity through magical form. Though revealed in Harry Potter and The Deathly Hallows, it had remained unknown for decades, a doe identical to Lily Potter's. The fact that he never revealed it, never showed it to others, and only cast it in absolute solitude underscores its painful intimacy. It wasn't meant for anyone to see. When Dumbledore witnessed it, he understood at once what it meant. "After all this time?" he asked. "Always," Snape replied. That single Patronus undid years of ambiguity and gave context to a man who had lived in shadows. The Ministry of Magic once debated implementing Patronus identification in their security protocols during the height of Voldemort's second rise. The idea was to have each aura and department head register their Patronus in a secret file to prevent impersonation and verify authenticity in the event of infiltration. The project collapsed after dozens of officials refused to participate. The reason? Not cowardice, but privacy. One aura, Matilda Cresswell, argued in the Wizengamot, "If you make a Patronus a name badge, you strip it of its sanctity. My Patronus is not a password, it's a piece of my heart." Some wizards fear more than embarrassment. There are stories, half rumor, half truth, of dark wizards who sought to manipulate or distort Patronuses. An old tale from Eastern Europe speaks of a warlock who could imitate another's Patronus and use it to mislead their loved ones or send false signals in battle. If such a spell exists, it has never been documented officially, but the mere belief in its possibility is enough to sow fear. Knowing the shape of one's Patronus could be knowing the shape of their soul, and that knowledge, in the wrong hands, is a dangerous weapon. In magical circles like the Order of the Phoenix, Patronuses were used as communicative tools, each member's unique form signaling identity. Yet even within the Order, some members resisted revealing theirs. It's rumoured that Sturgis Podmore never conjured his in front of the others, claiming he relied on verbal messages instead. The reasons are unclear, though some believe it was out of distrust or personal grief. The choice of concealment also intersects with cultural magical beliefs. In certain African magical traditions, particularly among the Mwandishi circle of eastern Uganda, Patronuses are considered ancestral manifestations. To reveal your Patronus is to expose the spirit that protects your bloodline. These witches and wizards perform the charm only during sacred rites and never outside their community. It is not secrecy born of shame, but reverence. Even in Hogwarts, students learn to summon Patronuses only in their 5th or 6th year and only in controlled environments. It is not encouraged as common magic. The spell, like love or grief, must be handled with care. Remus Lupin, when teaching Harry, emphasized the difficulty of using the charm. "You must think of something very happy," he said in Prisoner of Azkaban. But happiness is not a simple thing. For some it comes with scars. The emotional cost of casting a Patronus is often forgotten in the celebration of the charm's beauty. Take the case of Fiona Delamere, a British witch whose Patronus, a swan, had once saved an entire Muggle family during a Dementor attack. For years after, she refused to cast it again. "It reminds me of what I had to become that night," she wrote in a personal letter. The swan was graceful, powerful, but for Fiona it was forever linked to violence and blood. Her happiest memory had been twisted by what she had to do with it. Others simply cannot bear the idea of judgment. If a Patronus comes in the form of a rat, a spider, or a serpent, it may be misunderstood, even feared. The wizard Gordon Murlock, who taught magical zoology in the 1970s, had a Patronus shaped like a vulture. Though harmless in magical theory, it brought him ridicule. Students called him Deathbird. He eventually stopped casting it altogether, requesting a leave of absence when a student's prank mimicked his Patronus and led to a panic. The vulture was not evil, it was simply misunderstood. Not all who hide their Patronuses do so out of pain. For some, it is simply a choice, a quiet power. "When you reveal your Patronus," wrote the French poet witch Aimée de Sauveterre, "you show the shape your joy takes. Let no one else hold that joy but you." Aimé's own Patronus was never known, though she hinted in letters that it was something fierce, golden, and winged. Her admirers still debate what it might have been. Perhaps that was her intent all along. Then there are the tragic cases where no Patronus could be summoned after a great loss. Andromeda Tonks, after the death of her husband and daughter, could no longer cast one. The spell failed. The happiness required to power it had been stripped away, but even that silence, that inability, is a message. A Patronus can be a ghost, even when it never forms. It lives in memory. What becomes clear in these examples is that the Patronus is not merely a charm, it is a confessional. Whether seen or hidden, it speaks to who we are beneath our masks, behind our titles. In choosing not to show it, a witch or wizard may not be hiding weakness, but protecting something sacred, their grief, their love, their loss, their light. The most powerful magic often lives in silence. and the Patronus, for all its brilliance and strength, may shine brightest when it is left unseen. Number 22, it may reflect unfulfilled dreams. There are spells that shield the body and spells that mend the broken, but the Patronus charm is unlike any other. It shields the soul. It is not merely a silvery shape summoned to ward off darkness. It is, in many cases, the unspoken autobiography of a wizard's inner world. Most know it as a guardian of happy memories, a spiritual protector formed from light. But what few realize is this: sometimes a Patronus does not reflect who you are, but who you wish you were. Ella Merriweather had never been the kind of student who drew attention. In the early years at Hogwarts, her name barely made it into classroom records, except when she was being marked absent. A Hufflepuff with a whispering voice and a habit of avoiding eye contact, she spent more time in the library's shadowed corners than in the company of others. Even among the kind-hearted Hufflepuffs, Ella seemed misplaced, too quiet for friendly banter, too easily startled to volunteer in class. Yet she was not unhappy, just invisible, as if her own existence was always one step behind the rest of the world. It came as a shock then, when during a fifth-year Defense Against the Dark Arts lesson, her Patronus materialized in the form of a lion. The silvery beast prowled across the classroom floor, flickering with raw intensity and pride, causing gasps and stunned murmurs to ripple through the students. Professor Tyburn, a stern former Auror with little patience for theatrics, blinked twice and scribbled a note in his ledger. No one could reconcile the lion, a symbol of leadership, bravery, and wild courage, with Ella Merriweather, the girl who apologized when others stepped on her shoes. Even within the magical world, Patronuses often align with one's most deeply rooted characteristics. Harry Potter's stag echoed his father's form, a bond of heritage and protection. Hermione Granger's otter reflected intelligence and playfulness, aligned with her curious spirit. But Ella's lion, it made no sense. For days after the incident, speculation buzzed in the common room. Some insisted it was a fluke, a magical error. Others muttered about ancient bloodlines, theories more rooted in fantasy than fact. But the truth lay not in her ancestry, nor in the metrics of her daily behavior. It lay deeper, in the marrow of her longing. Ella had grown up in a wizarding family in Wiltshire, the youngest of 4 sisters. All 3 of her older siblings were confident, beautiful, and wildly successful in their magical fields. Her oldest sister, Marianne, had become a curse-breaker for Gringotts. The second, Lucinda, was a Quidditch player on the Holyhead Harpies reserve team. The third, Evangeline, had opened a chain of popular apothecaries in Diagon Alley. Ella, in contrast, had been a quiet child, perpetually overshadowed by brilliance. She learned early to sit quietly at family gatherings, listening rather than speaking, clapping instead of competing. But she had dreams. Oh, she had dreams that kept her awake at night, visions of herself leading others through danger, shielding the weak from cruelty, confronting injustice with a voice louder than thunder. She read books on famous auras and heroes of the wizarding wars, not for entertainment, but to imagine herself among them. The lion in her Patronus was not a symbol of her present self, but of the warrior she longed to become. And that longing was so powerful, so achingly pure, that it manifested through her magic. The Patronus, born from desire as much as identity, had taken the shape of that secret dream. In The Tales and Theories of Advanced Patronus Magic by Sylvia Thistleton, a volume banned from the Hogwarts library due to its psychological implications, the author writes, "The Patronus, in rare but meaningful cases, may express the anima rather than the ego. It may appear as not what the caster is, but what the caster wishes to be. This reveals a second layer to the soul's light, a reflective echo of suppressed aspiration." Ella Merriweather, though she had never read the book, had become living proof of Thistleton's claim. The effects were immediate and strange. In the weeks following the appearance of her Patronus, Ella began to change. Not dramatically, not overnight, but like dawn creeping slowly across a frost-covered field. She volunteered more in class, though her voice still trembled. She joined the dueling club, though her hand shook when she raised her wand. She spoke up in group work and even corrected a Ravenclaw in potions. The lion had not only represented her dream, it had lent her the strength to chase it. In its image, she began to grow into the version of herself she had always imagined. One might argue that the magic had always been inside her, dormant and waiting. But perhaps it was not courage that summoned the lion. Perhaps it was the need for courage, the aching, desperate desire to be brave, that created a vessel through which it could pour. In this, the Patronus was not a reflection of her strength, but a lantern illuminating the path toward it. For in truth, some Patronuses do not celebrate who we are, they dare us to become who we are meant to be. This concept is echoed again in a lesser-known case mentioned in Hidden Histories of Hogwarts by Elspeth Darnell. During the 1920s, a Ravenclaw student named Morvyn Silehart, known for his arrogance and cruelty, produced a Patronus in the form of a wounded doe. His classmates mocked him for it, unaware that the image reflected the remorse he refused to admit, the gentleness he buried deep beneath layers of pride. As Darnell notes, the Patronus is not polite, it does not lie, it tells the truth of the soul in ways the mouth cannot. In Ella's case, the truth was not a confession, but a call. And yet not all teachers embraced this philosophy. Professor Tyburn himself privately consulted Headmistress McGonagall, uncertain whether Ella had somehow triggered a corrupted spell. McGonagall, however, had seen something similar once before, a young Gryffindor who conjured a badger, the emblem of patience and quiet resilience. That student, she explained, had longed for peace more than victory. She reminded Tyburn that magic bends not only to will, but to longing, and longing is perhaps the purest form of intent. It is easy to imagine that a Patronus must be a mirror. We expect it to show what is already true. But magic, like the soul, is far more complex than mirrors. It doesn't merely reflect, it reveals. It draws from the past, the present, and sometimes the future we desperately crave. It listens not only to the surface, but to the storm beneath. Ella Merriweather graduated Hogwarts with average marks, but by her 7th year, she had become the unofficial protector of younger students. She escorted first years through the Forbidden Forest after a rogue hippogriff sighting. She hexed a 6th-year Slytherin who was tormenting a Muggleborn. She became, slowly but irreversibly, the lion she had conjured. Years later, she would join a small team of independent magical mediators resolving conflicts between centaur herds and human encroachments on sacred forests, a job requiring bravery, empathy, and the ability to walk into danger with an open heart. The story of her Patronus became a quiet legend among those who study magical identity. It is still referenced in essays and magical psychology seminars under the term Merriweather phenomenon, a case where the Patronus was aspirational, not representative. Some call it rare. Others argue it is more common than we think, simply misinterpreted. After all, how many Patronuses are explained away as strange quirks without ever digging into the heart behind them? In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Dumbledore tells Harry, "You care so much you feel as though you will bleed to death with the pain of it." That line, which has echoed in hearts for years, is perhaps the key to understanding Patronus magic. It is not what you pretend to be, not what others think you are. It is the part of you that would bleed for what you long to become. That's what Ella's lion was, not a symbol of her past, but a promise to her future. Another dimension to this phenomenon is the emotional rawness required to summon such a Patronus. It is not enough to fantasize, and the longing must be genuine, soul-deep, and at odds with reality. In this conflict between self and self, magic finds a space to bloom. It's why these cases are rare, not because few dream, but because few dream with enough force to turn that dream into light. For students at Hogwarts today, Ella's story is shared in quiet moments and study groups, not because she was famous, but because she was real. Her lion Patronus has become a symbol for the unseen strivers, those who live in the margins but carry within them storms of transformation. It is a reminder that even the quietest soul can roar, not because they were always loud, but because they believed they could be. In the final analysis, magic has always been more than incantations. It is memory, emotion, desire, and identity made manifest. And the Patronus charm, more than any other spell, bridges the invisible with the visible, the truth with the hope. For some, the stag or otter or phoenix is a reflection. But for the dreamers, for those who ache to be more, it is a glimpse of who they could yet become. And sometimes that glimpse is all it takes. Number 23, considered sacred in some cultures. In the cold northern reaches of the magical world, far from the familiar turrets of Hogwarts, there is a place called Skarsheim. Hidden deep within the fjords of Norway, it is home to one of the oldest Scandinavian wizarding colonies, where traditions have survived for centuries, untouched by the currents of modern magical education. Here, the Patronus is not simply a defensive spell taught in school. It is revered, feared even, and believed to be the very mirror of the soul. Children in Skarsheim grow up not hearing bedtime stories of the boy who lived, but of ancestors whose lives were shaped and guided by the creatures that emerged from their wands in silver light. When a child comes of age, the entire village gathers under the aurora-lit sky, and a ceremony known as the Lisvalk takes place. The moment the Patronus bursts from the wand, the shape it takes becomes the bearer of the youth's destiny. A raven means wisdom and leadership. A wolf signifies loyalty and sacrifice. A serpent, rare and often misunderstood, is seen as a mark of silent power and deep spiritual sensitivity. Sigrid Eidsvoll, a prominent historian from the Skarsheim Magical Archives, documented over 100 cases where a wizard's Patronus had direct influence on their future. She often recounted the tale of her ancestor, Torvald, whose Patronus was a polar bear, a symbol associated in their culture with protectors of the weak. True to the sign, Torvald later gave his life shielding a village from a rampaging band of dark creatures released during Grindelwald's rise. The Patronus, she wrote in her private journals, is not just a spell, it is a revelation. To conjure one is to uncover a sliver of one's fate. This idea that a Patronus is more than magical light is not exclusive to Scandinavia. In the Indian section of the International Confederation of Wizards, the Patronus is regarded as a divine messenger, a voice from the spiritual realm. Their version of the summoning ceremony is known as Atma Darshan, the vision of the soul. It is a practice older than the Confederation itself, predating the Ministry of Magic and the Statute of Secrecy. Under the guidance of Guru Mahendra Vashisht, a senior magical sage in Mumbai's Satkarian Circle, young witches and wizards perform a meditative rite in a sandstone amphitheatre, surrounded by symbols of the 5 elements. They are instructed not to fear Dementors, none are present, but to focus instead on their deepest truths. The Patronus that appears is said to be the embodiment of the direction they must take. One case that captured attention across magical India was that of Anya Deshmukh, a shy girl born into a family of talented duelists. Everyone expected her to produce a lion or tiger, symbols of combat and strength. But when her Patronus appeared, it was a gentle deer. Her mentors were astonished. According to traditional lore, the deer is the harbinger of peace, intuition, and healing. Following the vision, Anya defied family expectations and went on to become one of the leading experts in magical plant-based medicine in southern Asia. "Had I listened only to my family's wishes," she later wrote in Prashna Aur Jadoo, I might have become a good duelist, but the Patronus showed me what I was meant to become. This sacred interpretation of the Patronus finds echoes even in less formal corners of the magical world. In a 1983 edition of the Daily Prophet, an obscure article referenced a gathering of North African wizards who practiced a form of magical philosophy tied closely to animal spirits. While most of the wizarding community dismissed the event as a mere novelty, a young British aura named Joseph Macmillan attended and wrote about the experience in his personal memoir. He described witnessing a young boy no older than 12 summon a lioness Patronus, only to have the village elder burst into tears. Later, the elder explained that the lioness had not appeared in that region for over 70 years, and the last time it had, the caster had gone on to lead a revolution against a corrupt magical governor. Rowling hinted at the deeper nature of the Patronus in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix when Dumbledore says, "You know, Harry, in a way, you did see your father last night. You found him inside yourself." The statement, made after Harry casts a stag Patronus identical to James Potter's, subtly points to the idea that Patronuses are not only protectors, but reflections of lineage, memory, and identity. In many cultures, such a reflection is taken with utmost seriousness. The idea that a part of one's ancestry or spiritual purpose reveals itself in this silver animal gives the spell a near-religious gravity. In South America, particularly in the Andes region, there are whispers of Patronuses being connected to ancient Incan animal spirits. Although heavily debated, some magical anthropologists argue that the Quechua word Causaikilla, spirit light, describes the same phenomenon as a Patronus. In 1974, a Peruvian Magi zoologist named Esteban Quispe claimed to have found cave murals near Machu Picchu that depicted wizards surrounded by glowing animal forms fighting shadowy figures. He believed these were ancestral representations of the Patronus used in spiritual warfare against dark magic. While the ministry dismissed his theories as speculative, his sketches remain archived at the Universidad Mágica del Cusco. Not all cultures embrace the Patronus with reverence. In some parts of Eastern Europe, especially among secluded magical sects in the Carpathians, it is seen with suspicion. A glowing animal that can drive away darkness might also, they argue, reveal secrets better left buried. One such sect, known as the Oromeni, teaches that the Patronus should never be cast except in dire emergencies. To them, the act of exposing one's innermost self, especially in animal form, is akin to laying one's soul bare before unseen forces. Yet even in Western Europe, where Hogwarts dominates the narrative, there are signs that the meaning of the Patronus goes beyond its function. Consider Severus Snape. His Patronus, a doe identical to Lily Potter's, is a visual embodiment of undying love. It is a tragic and intimate declaration, stronger than any words he ever said. "Always," he told Dumbledore, revealing not only his allegiance, but his soul. A Patronus, in this case, was a love letter made of light. Albus Dumbledore himself had an affinity for deep magical symbolism. Though his Patronus, believed to be a phoenix, was never explicitly shown, it was widely assumed to reflect rebirth, transformation, and the power of endurance. Fawkes, his real-life phoenix companion, mirrored the same qualities. This parallel suggests that Dumbledore may have chosen not to show his Patronus publicly because he believed in its spiritual weight. To cast it casually would be to trivialize something sacred. In the case of Luna Lovegood, whose Patronus was a hare, there is another subtle layer. In many folklores, the hare is a symbol of lunar energy, dreamlike wisdom, and delicate yet strong femininity. Luna's deep connection with mystical creatures, her belief in the unseen, and her resilience in the face of ridicule all echo the symbolism of her Patronus. Her magic was not conventional, but it was intuitive, spiritual, and that is precisely what her Patronus suggests. When Harry first conjured his Patronus in The Prisoner of Azkaban, The stag seemed like a fortunate coincidence. But in light of cultural interpretations, the fact that Harry's Patronus matched his father's was more than emotional. It was archetypal. The stag, the king of the forest, is a guardian, noble and powerful. Harry's journey from a scared boy to a leader willing to face death matches the stag's symbolism in countless traditions. Hermione's Patronus, an otter, often feels surprising given her rigid academic personality. Yet the otter is a creature of playfulness, intelligence, and adaptability. It reflects a deeper part of Hermione that values intuition and emotional insight just as much as logic and books. One could argue that her Patronus is not who she appears to be, but who she truly is beneath the pressure of excellence. In 1998, a group of scholars at Beauxbatons Academy of Magic conducted a cross-cultural study of Patronus forms and their meanings. Their findings showed significant overlap between the form and the caster's hidden desires, often more than their conscious self-image. A girl who wished to be brave summoned not a lion, but a fox, clever, elusive, independent. A boy who idolized dueling produced not a dragon, but a nightingale, symbol of peace through song. The conclusion: the Patronus is what you need, not what you want. Remus Lupin, whose Patronus was a wolf, once expressed regret at its form. He feared it marked him as a werewolf, a dangerous beast. But those familiar with Norse and Celtic symbolism know that the wolf is not just a predator, it is a guardian of the threshold, a guide between worlds. Remus, who spent his life protecting students and walking the line between man and monster, was exactly that. His Patronus told the truth he couldn't bear to admit. Kingsley Shacklebolt's Lynx Patronus is another revealing example. The lynx is a secretive, noble creature that watches from the shadows. In Slavic and Siberian mythology, it is considered a divine observer, capable of seeing what others miss. Kingsley, who worked undercover and later served as Minister for Magic, embodied these traits. His Patronus wasn't just powerful, it was prophetic. Minerva McGonagall's cat Patronus is often interpreted as simple. She can turn into a cat, so of course her Patronus is one. But in Celtic tradition, the cat is a symbol of independence, mystery, and silent protection. McGonagall, with her sharp wit and quiet loyalty, fits this image perfectly. She was never loud in her devotion to Hogwarts or Dumbledore's cause, but her protection was constant and fierce. Even Dolores Umbridge's Patronus, a cat, takes on chilling significance. In her case, it is not a reflection of loyalty or mystery, but a warning. In some cultures, cats represent illusion and deceptive beauty. The fact that her feline Patronus coexists with her cruelty implies that a Patronus does not always reflect virtue. It reflects identity. Even darkness can cast light if the spell is rooted in genuine belief. In the end, the Patronus is not merely a charm. Across cultures, languages, and centuries, it has taken the form of guide, guardian, and ghost. Whether summoned under the northern lights of Skarsheim, in the sacred circles of Mumbai, or the haunted halls of Hogwarts, it remains one of the most intimate spells in the magical world. To know your Patronus is to know yourself. And perhaps, as many cultures believe, to see the path that lies ahead. Number 24. Dark variants once existed. In the depths of magical history, beneath the well-known brilliance of the Patronus charm, lies a shadow that few wizards dare to speak of. While the spell, Expecto Patronum, is celebrated as a beacon of hope, a luminous shield born of positive memories and pure intentions, its legacy is not entirely untouched by darkness. The Ministry of Magic, ever vigilant in guarding the boundaries of ethical magic, has long kept certain records hidden within the restricted archives, records that speak of something far more sinister, the forbidden variations of the Patronus charm, commonly referred to in whispered tones as the Black Patronuses. These versions are not born of joy. Rather, they are conjured through a twisted cocktail of grief, domination, and dark enchantments layered upon the traditional spell. Unlike the silvery animals of traditional Patronuses, these aberrations emit a thick grey mist, a smoke-like vapour that snakes through the air with eerie slowness. Rather than repelling Dementors with light and warmth, black Patronuses seek to manipulate them. The concept is as dangerous as it is unnatural, using dark spells to tether the Dementor's will to that of the caster. In theory, the creature would obey commands. In reality, it rarely ended without blood. The origins of the Black Patronus can be traced back to the early 14th century during a period of magical experimentation and chaos in the British Isles. Among the names recovered from fragmented scrolls and deteriorated ministry files, one stands out: Echrizdis, a dark sorcerer and presumed architect of Azkaban itself. Though not explicitly stated in modern historical texts, several unsanctioned documents suggest that Echrizdis attempted to enslave Dementors using a perverse form of the Patronus. The charm he developed was reportedly fueled not by a single happy memory, but by an emotional void, hatred disguised as clarity, grief sharpened into focus. One such document, dated 1327 and believed to have belonged to a scribe of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, describes Echrizdis's experiments in horrifying detail. "The creature obeys," it reads in faded ink, "but only in semblance. Beneath its stillness is rage. The Patronus no longer gleams. It twists, it suffocates, it does not protect, it commands, and the caster, in turn, is consumed." This passage has been cited by several magical historians as the earliest account of a black Patronus, and the grim warning it conveys has never lost relevance. By the 15th century, other dark wizards attempted to replicate Echrizdis's methods, convinced they could succeed where he had failed. One of the most notable figures among them was Morwenna Laveau, a half-blood witch exiled from the French magical community for her necromantic rituals. Morwenna arrived in England under the name Madame Grise and became known for her radical writings about controlling death and its agents. In her private correspondences, which were confiscated after her death in 1471, she described creating a black Patronus in the form of a vulture. "It did not fly," she wrote, "but hovered, its wings stagnant, dripping with shadows. She claimed that it whispered to the Dementors and caused them to hesitate in their approach." However, this illusion of control was short-lived. During a lunar eclipse, she attempted to perform a mass conjuration of Dementors off the coast of Cornwall, using her black Patronus as a summoning anchor. What followed was a catastrophe. Eyewitnesses from the village of Penhaligon recounted a storm of unnatural cold and screams without origin. When the Aurors arrived days later, they found Morwenna's remains fused to the walls of her stone chamber, eyes hollowed and lungs collapsed as though she had suffocated in open air. The idea of weaponizing Dementors using corrupted Patronuses gained traction briefly during the witch hunts in Eastern Europe. A Carpathian warlock named Durek Drachos used a black Patronus shaped like a spider, reportedly casting it during sieges to lure Dementors toward enemy camps. He was captured in 1608 by the Continental Confederation of Wizards and sentenced to imprisonment in Nurmengard. According to records retrieved by Dumbledore himself during his investigations into Grindelwald's origins, Drachos had no surviving students, none who dared to follow his path. The spider Patronus was last seen during his trial as a haunting mass of smoky legs that wrapped around the courtroom's torches, snuffing out their flame. It's important to understand why these aberrant Patronuses fail. The traditional charm functions as a direct contradiction to a Dementor's hunger. It fills the space with warmth, joy, and life force. But the black Patronus, rather than opposing the Dementor's instincts, seeks to mimic or override them. In doing so, it creates a volatile magical feedback loop. Dementors do not serve willingly. They are drawn by despair, and the magic of a black Patronus often reinforces that despair, not staves it off. In this sense, the caster becomes the bait. One tragic example recorded in the Ministry's archives is the case of Tarquin Muldoon, a Ravenclaw student who disappeared from Hogwarts in 1782. Muldoon, a brilliant but disturbed mind, was obsessed with the idea of transforming spells into tools of dominance. According to the journals found in his abandoned dormitory, he attempted to forge a Grey Patronus after the death of his twin brother. His final entry reads, "It no longer shines, but it listens. I have whispered my will into it, and it bends." He was last seen wandering near the Forbidden Forest during a cold snap, where Dementor sightings were later confirmed. His body was never recovered, only his wand, snapped clean in half, embedded in the ice. Professor Dumbledore, in one of his private notes discovered posthumously among his belongings at Hogwarts, acknowledged the legend of the Black Patronus, although he never confirmed its authenticity. He wrote, "There are magics that should not be shaped by grief. To wield light from sorrow is to forge a lantern from fire. It burns not only the shadows, but the hand that holds it." The quote now resides in the Department of Magical Artifacts as a reminder of the fine line between ingenuity and hubris. The subject of Black Patronuses was also quietly referenced in Defensive Magical Theory by Wilbert Slinkard, though the passage was censored in later editions. Slinkard claimed that any attempt to reverse engineer a Patronus would result in psychological decay. He cited cases of practitioners who developed symptoms akin to magical schizophrenia, unable to separate their consciousness from the fog of the conjured mist. This aligns with findings in Dark Spells and Their Consequences, where authors describe the after-effects of casting perverted, light-based spells, depression, visual hallucinations, and even an attraction to Dementors themselves. Of all the known attempts to master a Black Patronus, none are more disturbing than the case of Elric Thorne, a Death Eater, active during the First Wizarding War. Thorne was fascinated by Dementors and believed that they were the true guardians of magical justice. Rumors spread that he had developed a ritualized version of the Patronus that could encase a Dementor in a containment fog. Aurors pursuing Thorne in 1980 found his hideout filled with dead birds, dried silver leaves, and a symbol etched into the floor that matched the ancient rune for subjugation. When they breached the final room, they discovered a dead Dementor, its form cracked like glass, its mouth frozen mid-scream. Thorne himself had vanished, but scorch marks and blood along the stone floor indicated a struggle between magical forces that defied classification. There are scholars who argue that the Black Patronus is not a separate spell but a corruption of the caster's intent. They believe that any wizard attempting to control life forms rather than protect others already warps the Patronus by intent alone. In Magical Ethics and the Arcane Will, researcher Honoria Plinth explains, magic responds not only to spoken incantation, but to desire. A Patronus is not merely summoned, it is revealed. When the heart is broken, the light fractures. What emerges may still bear the shape of protection, but its core is rot. Interestingly, Dementors themselves have been observed reacting violently to Black Patronuses. In the few surviving witness accounts, rather than retreating or obeying, they enter a frenzied state. Some have theorized this is due to a disruption of their natural feeding cycle. Others believe that the Black Patronus, instead of controlling the Dementor, offers it a reflection of itself, a mirror of suffering too intimate to ignore. In either case, the result is always chaos. Modern-day spellcasters are strongly discouraged from any form of experimentation on the Patronus charm. The Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes classifies all modifications to the charm as Class A forbidden spellwork. To date, there are 17 known fatalities linked directly to Black Patronus experimentation. Of those, 14 were students or freelance researchers unaffiliated with any known dark movement. This highlights a dangerous truth. Curiosity alone, untempered by wisdom, can conjure monsters even the darkest wizard fears. Despite these warnings, traces of interest in the Black Patronus resurface every few decades. The last documented case occurred in 1995 during the chaos surrounding the return of Voldemort. A disillusioned ministry archivist, Alpheus Greenleaf, attempted to resurrect the vulture-shaped Patronus described by Morwenna Lavo. His neighbours later reported that every mirror in his flat had shattered in unison, and the air had turned so cold their windows frosted from the inside. Greenleaf was found alive but catatonic, murmuring in Latin about silver fire turned to ash. He never recovered. What makes the tale of the Black Patronus so haunting is not only its defiance of magical law, but its defiance of emotional truth. The Patronus, at its core, is a celebration of light in the darkest of times. To twist that light into a tool of control is to reject the very essence of hope. As Lupin once said to Harry, the Patronus is a kind of positive force, a projection of the very things that the Dementor feeds upon: hope, happiness, the desire to survive. Inverting that force is not a testament to power. It is a surrender to despair masquerading as strength. And still, the temptation lingers. In the cold corners of forgotten libraries and beneath the cracks of ancient stones, the spells wait. Not with the promise of salvation, but with the echo of all those who thought they could conquer shadows by becoming one.